Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Ibby's Bookshelf. I'm Ibby, and first off, I wanted to thank everyone for coming onto my channel and listening to my reviews. It's been really nice knowing that so many people have been coming onto my channel and watching my reviews. So thanks. Today's book review, I'm going to review a well-known book by a well-known author, and that author is Roald Dahl. A few things you should know about Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl was a spy, ace fighter pilot, chocolate historian, a medical inventor. He was also the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, the BFG, and many more brilliant stories. He remains the world's #1 storyteller. So make sure to read his other books that he's read. Today's book is The Twits. I don't know if you guys have read it or heard of it. If you have, make sure to comment in the comment section below. I really like Roald Dahl books because they're fun, intriguing, and he has such a great sense of humor. Even if it's like a really serious book, there's always something you can find to laugh about in them. So that's why I really enjoy his books. One of the characters in this book, as you might have already guessed, is Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit was one of those very hairy-faced men. His whole face, except for his forehead, his eyes, and his nose, was covered in thick hair. Hair was even sprouting in tufts out of his nostrils and ear holes. He looked absolutely revolting. And how often does Mr. Twit wash this bristly, nail-brushy face of his? The answer is, ding ding, never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Mr. Twit is the husband of Mrs. Twit. Mrs. Twit is just like her husband, without the hairy face. She also looks really revolting and frankly terrifying. But the thing is, Mrs. Twit didn't always look like that. She was once actually really pretty. But if you think ugly, you be ugly. In the book, Roald Dahl says that Mrs. Twit had really bad thoughts, really ugly thoughts, and it began to show on her appearance. From being a pretty girl, she turned into a nasty old hag. But the thing that confuses me is, why are Mr. and Mrs. Twit even married? In the story, they absolutely hate each other to bits. They are always fighting and thinking of ways to get rid of each other. They have so many pranks. Like Mrs. Twit, she has a glass eye, and once she put the glass eye in her husband's mug of beer. To get revenge, Mr. Twit put a frog in her bed. And to get revenge on that, Mrs. Twit gave him wormy spaghetti. It's basically spaghetti, but with worms. And believe it or not, Mr. Twit actually ate it. Ugh! To get revenge on that, Mr. Twit put little pieces of wood on Mrs. Twit's walking stick. She only uses the walking stick so she can hit children and cats and dogs. When Mrs. Twit saw that each day the walking stick got taller, she was very confused because Mr. Twit had done it so carefully you couldn't see it was getting taller. And Mrs. Twit thought that she was getting smaller. Mr. Twit convinced her that she had the dreaded shrinks, and the only way to cure her of it was to be stretched. Mr. Twit tied Mrs. Twit to the floor with a string on an iron bar and put tons of balloons to her hands. She was being stretched. And then when Mrs. Twit told her husband to make sure the strings were carefully tied so she didn't float away, Mr. Twit had another nasty idea. He cut the strings and he thought, finally, that old hag is gone forever, and he started relaxing. Now, Mrs. Twit may be ugly, but she wasn't stupid. She took off the balloons from her hands and came crashing down upon her husband. But enough of the pranks. Let's go on to the main parts of the story. Mr. and Mrs. Twit used to be in the circus, and they had 4 monkeys. When they retired, they took the 4 monkeys with them. Mr. and Mrs. Twit had a dream that one day they would be rich from people coming to seeing the first ever upside-down monkeys. They forced the monkeys, even the little babies, to be upside down 6 hours a day. They had to do everything upside down, even eat and drink, which really isn't easy. These monkeys play a huge part in the story. But enough about them. Let's go on to something else. Bird pie. Every Wednesday, Mr. and Mrs. Twit have bird pie. Mr. Twit smears the tree in their garden with hug-tight glue, the strongest glue in the world. And when birds come to roost, they are stuck there. The next day, Mr. Twit comes and kills them all for the bird pie. I don't know about you guys, but I have never had bird pie. On a normal day, since I'm from Sri Lanka, I usually have rice and curries. What do you guys have? Make sure to say in the comment section below. The birds and the monkeys had had enough of Mr. and Mrs. Twit and teamed up together to get revenge on the old people. They decided to make Mr. and Mrs. Twit believe that they were upside down. I'm not going to be a spoil sport and tell you how they did it, but they did it. Mr. and Mrs. Twit came into the house and saw everything on the ceiling. They thought, "What? Are we upside down?" Then Mr. Twit had the brilliant idea of going onto their heads so everything would be all right. But when they did, they were stuck like that and couldn't get back onto their feet. But do you want to know the strange thing? When you're on your head and everything is coming down, Mr. and Mrs. Twit actually got the dreaded shrinks. Their head went into their neck into their body into their legs, and their legs into their feet. In the end, there was nothing left of them except 2 pairs of shoes, some clothes, a walking stick. When Fred came over to their house to read the gas meter, this is what he saw. Everyone, including Fred, said, "Hooray!" And that's the end of the story. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to check out my other videos and make sure to like, share and subscribe. Bye!